Give her the broken barometer, Devin said, and both brothers laughed. Sydney Hansen stood at the end of the dining room table with her father's old canvas work jacket folded over one arm. Nobody had offered her a chair. Every other seat was taken by someone who had just received a house, a business, a truck, a bank account, or the right to tell somebody else what to do. The attorney looked down at the last page in Gerald Hansen's will. There isn't any specific personal property assigned to Sydney, he said. Chelsea Hansen had been waiting for that. She rose from Gerald's chair and went to the mudroom. She came back carrying a dusty cardboard box with softened corners. The bottom sagged under the weight. This was Walter's, she said. It's been sitting on the porch since we cleaned out his place. Walter Hansen had been dead 7 years. He'd been Gerald's father, Sydney and Ethan's grandfather, and the only person in that room who had ever made Sydney feel useful before asking what she could do for him. Chelsea set the box on the table. A rusted lantern lay on top of 2 work shirts. Beneath them were fencing gloves, an old rain gauge, 3 stained notebooks, and a round wooden barometer with cracked glass. Its brass rim had gone green in places. The needle was stuck a little below fair, where it had been for years. Devin leaned back in his chair. That thing isn't worth $10 at a yard sale. Ethan laughed more quietly, almost as if he wanted credit for showing restraint. Sydney didn't laugh. She put down the jacket and lifted the barometer with both hands. Dust marked her palms. The wood felt familiar. "How did this get here?" she asked. Chelsea was already returning to the paperwork. "Your grandfather's things came over after he died. You told me the cabin was emptied. It was emptied. You never said you kept this." Chelsea picked up a pen. "I didn't keep it for you, Sydney. I forgot it existed." That landed harder than Devin's joke. Sydney ran her thumb over a shallow cut near the bottom of the wooden case. She had made that mark with a hoof knife during one of her summers with Walt. She'd been trying to pry dried mud from the sole of a boot. The blade slipped, and she'd expected him to shout. Instead, Walt had looked at the gouge and said, "Well, now we'll know which one's ours." At the table, attorney Peter Lang cleared his throat. "We still need signatures on the property acknowledgments." Ethan turned a page toward Sydney, though there was no line for her name. "Can we finish this?" he said. "We've got cattle to move." Sydney looked at him. "You've got cattle to move." His jaw tightened. 2 weeks earlier, they had still been their father's cattle. That Friday morning, Sydney had been in the calving shed before sunrise. A late storm had blown through Johnson County overnight, leaving wet snow along the fence posts and a skin of ice on the water trough. Gerald came out wearing the same canvas jacket Sydney now carried. He had a coffee mug in one hand and a feed store receipt in the other. "You checked the red heifer?" he asked. "Twice. She's close. She's been close since Tuesday." Gerald stepped around a patch of mud and looked through the gate. "You call Ethan? He said he'd be here at 7. Gerald checked his watch. It was 20 past 7. Sydney didn't say anything. She had learned early that there were 2 kinds of lateness on the Hansen ranch. There was her lateness, which meant she wasn't serious. Then there was Ethan's lateness, which meant he was handling something important. Gerald drank his coffee and winced. "You all right?" Sydney asked. "Heartburn. You've had it all week. I've eaten Chelsea's chili all week." He smiled, so Sydney let it go. That decision returned to her later at odd times. It came back when she washed her hands. It came back when she heard a coffee mug touch a countertop. It came back whenever someone said they thought a person had simply been tired. At 21, Sydney had spent most of her life learning when not to press her father. She could push a cow through a narrow chute without frightening it. She could tell from Gerald's shoulders when another question would make him walk away. He had loved her. She knew that. The trouble was that Gerald often loved people in private and chose convenience in public. Ethan arrived at 8 with Devin in the passenger seat. Ethan climbed out carrying a folder from the bank. Devin stayed in the truck long enough to finish something on his phone. "We need to talk about the expansion note," Ethan called. Gerald looked toward the shed. "We need to pull that calf first. The banker's expecting an answer. The heifer doesn't care." Ethan glanced at Sydney. She can handle it. Sydney could handle it. That wasn't the point, and all 3 of them knew it. Gerald hesitated. Ethan waited. Devin finally got out and shut the truck door. "Chelsea wants you at the house, too," Devin said. "Insurance thing." Gerald handed his coffee to Sydney. "Get her into the small pen. Don't pull unless you have to." "I know. I'm just saying. I know, Dad." He touched her shoulder once. Then he walked back toward the house with his sons. Sydney watched them cross the yard. Ethan was broad like Gerald. Devin was narrower and moved too quickly, as if he always had somewhere else to be. From behind, the three men looked like they were going into a meeting Sydney had somehow failed to qualify for. She set Gerald's mug on the fence post and went back to work. The calf came 40 minutes later without a chain. Sydney knelt in the straw, clearing its nose while the heifer turned and sniffed at it. She was smiling when she heard Chelsea scream. The sound came from the front of the house. Sydney climbed over the gate instead of opening it. She ran across the yard with mud on both knees. Ethan was on the porch beside Gerald. Devin stood against the railing with both hands over his mouth. Gerald lay on his back, one boot twisted beneath him. Chelsea had the emergency dispatcher on speaker. "He just fell," she kept saying. He said his chest hurt, and then he fell. Sydney dropped beside her father. Ethan was trying chest compressions, but his arms were bent wrong. Sydney pushed him aside and locked her hands over Gerald's chest. She knew first aid. Everyone on a remote ranch knew enough to be afraid of what they didn't know. "Dad," she said, "Dad, stay here." His eyes were partly open. They didn't move toward her. The ambulance came from Buffalo. It took time. Sydney kept pressing until a paramedic replaced her. Then she stood in the yard with Gerald's coffee drying on her sleeve. Nobody told her to stop hoping. Nobody had to. By noon, the porch had been washed. By evening, Ethan had answered 3 calls from cattle buyers. Chelsea sat at the kitchen table with Gerald's phone in front of her, watching it light up every few minutes. Sydney stayed in the mudroom because it was the last place her father's boots still looked ordinary. Devin came in after dark. "Chelsea says you should eat. I'm not hungry. You need anything?" Sydney looked at him. Devin rarely asked that, unless he wanted the answer to be no. "Where were you and Ethan going this morning?" "We weren't going anywhere." "You brought bank papers. That was ranch business." "What ranch business?" Devin rubbed the back of his neck. "You'll have to ask Ethan." "I'm asking you." And I said, "Ask Ethan." He opened the refrigerator, stood in front of it without taking anything, then closed it again. "Don't start making this difficult," he said. Sydney stared at him. Their father had been dead for less than 12 hours. Devin realized what he'd said. For 1 second, shame crossed his face. Then he turned toward the kitchen. "I didn't mean it like that, but he didn't come back." The funeral was held the next Thursday at a small church in Buffalo. The parking lot filled with mud-splashed pickups. Men who had argued with Gerald over cattle prices stood in line to call him fair. Women brought food to the house in glass dishes marked with tape so Chelsea would know where to return them. Sydney stood near the front doors and accepted condolences from people who kept telling her she had Gerald's eyes. Ethan stood beside the casket. Devin managed the guest book. Chelsea wore black and held herself with both hands. Brian Walker came in after most people were seated. He was 60, sun-browned, and still walked with a slight hitch from a horse wreck years earlier. He had worked for Walt for more than 3 decades before buying his own place north of Willow Creek Road. Gerald and Brian had never been close. Gerald thought Brian remained too loyal to the old ways. Brian thought Gerald mistook debt for progress. He stopped in front of Sydney. "I heard you got that calf out," he said. Sydney nodded. "Your dad would have asked about it by now." That was the first thing anyone said all week that made her cry. Brian didn't hug her. He stood beside her while she looked down and wiped her face with the heel of her hand. After the service, he found her again near the church steps. "You staying at the ranch?" he asked. "I live there." "That wasn't what I asked." Sydney looked across the parking lot. Ethan was talking to the banker beside Gerald's truck. Chelsea stood with Peter Lang, the family attorney. Devin was near the road, speaking into his phone with his back turned. "I don't know," she said. Brian watched them too. Walt used to say not knowing was honest, long as you didn't make a home of it. Sydney almost smiled. He said that about weather. He said it about everything. Brian put on his hat and walked toward his truck. The will meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Chelsea called it a family discussion, but the attorney was there when Sydney arrived, and the documents were already arranged in separate stacks. Gerald had signed the will 4 months before his death. Sydney hadn't known he was changing anything. Ethan had known there were new business provisions. Chelsea had known all of it. Devin claimed he hadn't, though he showed no surprise when Peter Lang began reading. Chelsea kept the ranch house and its contents, along with the right to live there for the rest of her life. Ethan received Hanson Cattle Company, the livestock, the operating contracts, and every acre of ranch land recorded in Gerald's name. He also assumed the business loans. The debt was substantial, but so was the land. Ethan sat straighter as each parcel was named. Devin received 3 trucks, 2 stock trailers, the loader, the skid steer, the newer tractor, and what remained in Gerald's personal checking account after expenses. Sydney listened for her name. Peter turned one page, then another. The attorney explained that Gerald believed Sydney was young, unmarried, and not yet established. There had been talk of future assistance. There was no amount named. There was no property set aside. There was no instruction requiring anyone to help her. When Peter finished, Sydney thought he might have missed a page. "That's all?" she asked. Chelsea folded her hands. "Your father expected Ethan to keep the ranch operating," she said. "I work here. You help. I've worked here since I could reach a gate latch." Ethan looked down at his papers. "This isn't about who worked hardest. I didn't say it was. You're making it sound that way." Sydney turned to the attorney. "Did Dad leave me anything?" Peter was careful. "There is no separate bequest in your name." The room became very quiet. Sydney looked at Chelsea. "You knew." Chelsea's expression shifted into something gentle and practiced. "Your father worried that dividing the ranch again would destroy it." "Again? Between too many people. There are 3 of us." Ethan spoke before Chelsea could answer. "Devin didn't get land. He got equipment. He got assets with loans against some of them." Devin looked over. "Thanks for announcing that." Sydney kept her eyes on Ethan. "And you get everything else. I get the responsibility. You always liked that word when it came with keys." Ethan pushed his chair back slightly. "What do you want, Sydney? A third of the acreage cut out? A third of the herd? You want me selling cattle next month to cover taxes because you need to feel included?" She hadn't asked for a third. She hadn't known what she expected. A pasture, the bunkhouse, 1 old truck, maybe written confirmation that her father had noticed she was there. Chelsea rose and brought in Walt's box. Then Devin made his joke. "Give her the broken barometer." The laughter lasted only a few seconds. Ethan stopped when he saw Sydney's face. Devin reached for his water glass. Chelsea didn't laugh, but she didn't correct either of them. Sydney held the barometer against her stomach. "You can leave the rest," Chelsea said. "There's nothing useful in there." Sydney looked through the box. Walt's notebook smelled faintly of damp paper. One had a grocery list on the first page and rainfall totals near the back. His old work shirts were stiff from years in storage. The lantern chimney was broken. "I'm taking all of it," Chelsea sighed. "Fine, and Dad's jacket. That belongs with the house. It's a jacket. It was Gerald's. He gave it to me Friday morning." Chelsea's mouth tightened. They both knew he hadn't. Sydney had simply been the last person to hold it before he died. Ethan looked tired now. "Let her take the jacket." Chelsea turned on him. "You don't need to give permission for everything." "No, apparently you do," Sydney said. She picked up the box. It was heavier than she expected. The bottom shifted, and Peter Lang stood as though he might help. Sydney moved before he could touch it. At the front door, Ethan followed her. "Wait." She kept walking. He caught up on the porch, the same porch where their father had died. "You don't have to make this into us throwing you out," he said. Sydney adjusted the box against her hip. "Are you throwing me out?" "No." "Can I stay in my room?" Ethan glanced back through the open door. Chelsea was watching. "For a while," he said. "How long is a while? We need space to sort things out." "You've had 2 weeks. That's not fair." Sydney gave a small, tired laugh. "No, it isn't." Ethan lowered his voice. "There's an apartment over the tack shop in town. I could ask about it." "With what money?" "You've got some savings. $2,000. You'll find work. I have work." He looked toward the cattle pens. "I can't pay another full hand right now. You're not paying Devin. Devin's equipment is going into the operation. His equipment. It has to earn." Sydney shifted the box again. The cracked barometer knocked softly against the lantern. Ethan heard it. "Don't carry that by the glass," he said. "It'll break worse." That was Ethan. He could help with the corner of a problem while standing inside the middle of it. Sydney carried the box to her pickup. Her truck was an old blue half-ton that Gerald had bought from Brian years before. The title was already in Sydney's name because she had paid Gerald back from seasonal wages. At the time, Chelsea had called it a good lesson in responsibility. Now, it was the only thing Sydney owned that could move everything else she owned. She packed after dark. Chelsea stood in the doorway of Sydney's room while clothes went into feed sacks and a cracked plastic tote. "You don't have to leave tonight," she said. "Ethan said I can't work here. He said he can't pay you." "Same thing. There are jobs in town." Sydney folded 2 pairs of jeans. "Did Dad talk to you about leaving me out?" Chelsea paused. "He talked about protecting the ranch. That isn't what I asked." He was under pressure. "From who?" "From the bank, from cattle prices, from life, Sydney. Not everything is a scheme against you." Sydney put her boots into the tote. Chelsea stepped farther into the room. "Your father thought you might go back to school. I never told him that. He wanted options for you. So he gave everything to Ethan. Ethan has a family operation to run. So did I." Chelsea's face hardened. "You're 21. You have your whole life ahead of you. You're acting as if this is the end." Sydney closed the tote. "No. I'm acting like I need somewhere to sleep." She carried her things outside. There was one place no one had mentioned in the will meeting. It stood beyond the last usable pasture on Willow Creek Road, where the cottonwoods leaned over the water and the ground rose toward the old spring. Walt had called it the Line Camp. Though it had started as a spring house before Gerald was born, the cabin had one room, a stone chimney, and a roof that leaked in 3 places 7 summers ago. It would be worse now. Nobody had fought over it because nobody used it. The place sat past an old boundary fence on the ragged edge of the ranch, surrounded by ground too steep and wet for ordinary grazing. As far as Sydney knew, it belonged to whatever acreage Ethan had inherited. She also knew Ethan hadn't driven out there in years. She reached the turnoff after 10. The pickup headlights found a gate hanging from one hinge. Beyond it, the track was nearly gone. Sydney got out in the cold, dragged the gate aside, then drove slowly between the trees. The cabin appeared when her headlights crossed its front wall. Part of the porch had collapsed. A cottonwood limb rested on the roof. One window was boarded, and the other reflected her headlights through a gray sheet of dirt. Water moved somewhere behind the cabin. She could hear it even with the truck running. Sydney turned off the engine. The silence felt enormous. She found a flashlight under the seat and carried Walt's box to the porch. The front door had swollen in its frame. She struck it twice with her shoulder before it opened. Mice had been living inside. The old iron stove was rusted. One corner of the ceiling sagged under a dark water stain. Wind came through a gap near the window. Still, the walls stood. Sydney set the box on Walt's old workbench. She lifted out the barometer and wiped its cracked glass with her sleeve. The needle remained stuck below fair. "You were wrong about that one," she said. Outside, Willow Creek ran steadily through the dark. Sydney hung the barometer on the nail where Walt had kept it every summer. It leaned slightly because the wooden case had warped. She straightened it, stepped back, and heard something shift inside the brass tube. It was a small sound, too heavy to be dust and too loose to be part of the mechanism. Sydney reached up and took the barometer down again. The wood was cold against her hands. She tilted the case left, then right. Something slid about an inch and stopped. She carried the barometer to the workbench and aimed the flashlight along its edge. The back was held by small flathead screws darkened with age. 2 were missing. Another had been replaced with a newer screw that didn't match. Sydney looked around for Walt's tool drawer, then remembered she had cleaned it out with him one summer after a pack rat built a nest behind it. The drawer had been under the bench. It was still there, stuck with swollen wood. She pulled until it opened. Inside were 3 bent nails, a piece of chalk, an empty matchbook, and 1 screwdriver with a chipped red handle. She tried it against the newer screw. The blade fit, but the screw didn't move. Rain began tapping the roof. Sydney looked up. A drop gathered in the sagging corner, fell, and darkened the floor. Another struck the workbench beside the barometer. "Fine," she said. "You can wait." She placed the barometer inside its cardboard box, covered it with one of Walt's shirts, and moved the box away from the leak. The rain came harder. Within minutes, water was running down the wall near the stove. Sydney found an old bucket without a bottom, a cracked enamel basin, and 2 food tins left open for mice. None of them helped much. She dragged the workbench into the driest corner and put her plastic tote under it. The stove door opened with a scream of rust. The flue was clogged, and when she pushed the flashlight up, bits of nest fell into her hair. She shut it again. By midnight, the temperature had dropped enough that her breath showed. She returned to the truck, wrapped herself in Gerald's jacket, and lowered the seat. The cab smelled like dust, old coffee, and the peppermint gum she kept in the ashtray. She could still hear the creak. It ran behind the cabin with the steady confidence of something that didn't need permission. Sydney slept for perhaps an hour at a time. At dawn, she woke to knocking on the driver's window. Brian stood outside holding a metal thermos. She sat up too quickly and struck her knee beneath the steering wheel. "You always sleep sitting up?" he asked through the glass. Sydney opened the door. "Only when the house is raining indoors." He looked toward the cabin. "I saw your tire tracks. You checking up on me?" "I'm checking the creek." He lifted the thermos as if that explained everything. His cattle watered downstream from the spring. During dry months, every change at the head of Willow Creek reached his land by afternoon. Walt had once told Sydney that Brian could hear a blocked culvert from his kitchen. Brian denied this, but he did walk the creek line after every storm. Sydney climbed out. Her back hurt, and one side of her face felt creased from the jacket zipper. Brian handed her the thermos cup. The coffee was black and hot. "You tell Ethan you're here?" he asked. "No, you plan to?" "I plan to drink this first." "That's a plan." He left her beside the truck and walked around the cabin. He studied the roof from 3 angles, tested the porch boards with his boot, and disappeared behind the stone chimney. Sydney followed him with the coffee. "What are you looking for?" "Reasons to tell you this is a bad idea." "Find any?" "Several." He pointed at the cottonwood limb lying across the roof. "That shifted last night." "Another foot. It comes through the rafters. Chimney cap's gone. Porch is mostly decoration now. Back sill has rot." Sydney looked at the crooked building. "Anything good?" "The foundation's still square. You can tell from out here?" "No." Walt told me he said it twice. He rebuilt it. He reset the stones after the flood. Said if the creek wanted the cabin, it could come ask properly. Brian walked toward the water. The creek was wider than Sydney remembered. It came out from beneath a slope of rock and willow roots, crossed a shallow pool, then narrowed beside the cabin. The rain had made it cloudy near the banks, but the center ran clear. Brian crouched and moved a branch caught against a screen of old iron bars. "This intake still feeds your main trough?" Sydney asked. "Feeds the upper one when the diversion's open. Ethan's main trough too, among other things." He pushed the branch free. Water rose through the bars. Sydney looked back at the cabin. Then, "This place isn't useless." "I didn't say it was. Everybody else did." Everybody else was dividing things. Brian stood and wiped his hands on his coat. "People see value differently when they think it's theirs." He said it plainly. Then he returned to the truck and took a small chainsaw from the bed. Sydney followed. "What are you doing?" "Taking that limb off before the wind finishes the job." "I can't pay you. I didn't ask. I don't want charity." "Good. I need help replacing 2 miles of north fence before the cattle go up." "You can work it off." "When?" "Soon as this dries." "That's not a rate. Coffee was free. The rest we'll argue about later." Brian pulled the starter cord. The saw coughed once. Sydney put down the cup. "Tell me where you want the rope." They worked until the wet limb lay in sections beside the porch. Brian climbed the roof while Sydney held the ladder and passed up a roll of black patching membrane from his truck. The shingles were beyond saving, but they covered the worst opening and secured a loose sheet of tin over the sagging corner. Brian moved carefully. His old injury bothered him more in cold weather, though he never mentioned it. Sydney noticed the pause before he put weight on his left leg. "You should come down," she called. "You should hold the ladder. I am holding it. Then we're both doing fine." The stove took longer. They removed 2 nests, a dead starling, and enough dry grass to fill a feed sack. Brian inspected the pipe joints and sent Sydney outside while he lit a twist of newspaper. Smoke came out of the chimney. Some came into the room too, but only for a minute. By late morning, the cabin smelled of wet wood and old ash instead of mice. Brian stood in the middle of the floor and looked around. "You need a door latch." "I need a door. You've got most of one. The bed frame's rotten. Burn it. The table has 1 leg, 3 more, then the porch." Sydney laughed before she could stop herself. Brian nodded toward Walt's box. "That what Chelsea gave you?" "She gave me the box." "Devin gave me a joke." Sydney lifted the shirt and took out the barometer. Brian's face changed, not dramatically. He simply stopped looking around the cabin. "I thought that was gone," he said. "So did I." He held out his hands, and Sydney passed it to him. Brian wiped the brass rim with his thumb. Walt checked this every morning. He checked it at night too. Only when he thought weather was coming. He always thought weather was coming. Brian smiled. Fair. He tapped the glass near the stuck needle. Dropped it, did he? I don't know. That crack wasn't there when I worked here. It was there the last summer. Brian turned the case over. He noticed the mismatched screw immediately. Somebody opened the back. I tried. That screw's seized. He gave the case a gentle shake. The hidden piece moved inside the lower brass tube. Brian shook it again. That isn't part of the works, he said. You're sure? No. You sounded sure. I'm old enough to sound sure while thinking. He took the chipped screwdriver from the bench and tested it. The handle twisted without moving the screw. Don't force it, Sydney said. I'm not. You're turning red. That's the coffee. He stopped and returned the tool. Get some penetrating oil. Small screwdriver set. Soft brush. Don't spray anything near the dial. You know how to repair these? No, but I watched Walt ruin enough machinery to know when not to copy him. Brian set the barometer down. I've got mineral oil and brushes at home. I'll bring them after I check my lower field. I can go into town, get food while you're there. I have food. What? Peanut butter crackers. That's bait. It's food if you don't own a kitchen. He looked at her for a moment. Sydney expected an argument. Instead, he took a folded list from his shirt pocket and wrote the name of a hardware store clerk who repaired clocks as a hobby. Ask Nora Bell for advice, he said. Advice is cheaper than parts. Before Brian left, they carried the rotten bed frame outside. Sydney swept the floor with a broom that had more wire than straw. She opened both windows, removed the mouse nests from the cupboards, and found a blue enamel mug hanging behind the stove. Walt's initials were scratched underneath. She washed it in the creek, filled it with coffee from Brian's thermos, and sat on the porch step that still held her weight. Her phone showed 6 missed calls. 3 were from Chelsea, 2 were from Ethan, 1 was from Devin. She called Ethan. He answered immediately. Where are you? At the spring cabin. There was a short silence. The old line camp? Yes. Why? Because it has a roof. Barely. I patched it. With what? Sydney looked at the new strip of black membrane. Roof patch. That isn't what I mean. Who's helping you? Brian? Another silence, longer this time. What's Brian doing out there, checking the creek? He doesn't have business on our side of the fence. He's had business on this creek longer than I've been alive. That doesn't make it his. Sydney set the mug down. Did you call to ask if I was safe? Yes. Then I'm safe. Sydney, listen. That cabin isn't livable. Neither was my truck. You slept in your truck? She heard genuine concern in his voice. It irritated her more than anger would have. I'm staying here for now. You can't just decide that. You said I could stay at the ranch for a while. I meant the house. No, you didn't. Ethan exhaled. Behind him, someone spoke. Sydney couldn't make out the words, but she recognized Chelsea's tone. Ethan lowered his voice. Come back tonight. We'll work something out. What? I don't know yet. That's what you said yesterday. I've been busy. So have I. Sydney. The roof doesn't leak now. I have a stove. I'm fixing the door. That isn't a life. It's today. Ethan went quiet. Sydney knew he wanted her to return. He also wanted her to return grateful, temporary, and ready to accept whatever arrangement caused the least trouble. He didn't see that as cruelty. Ethan had always been good at believing the easiest answer for him was the reasonable answer for everyone. I need my hand tools, she said. The socket set in the calving shed, my drill, and the red toolbox. Those might belong to the company. My name is written on them. Fine. And my wages through Friday. You were paid last week. I worked 4 days after that. I'll check, don't check, pay me. His voice cooled. You're acting like I'd steal from you. I'm acting like I won't be back every day asking for things that are already mine. Chelsea spoke again in the background. Ethan said, Come by at 3. I'll come at 3. And don't bring Brian. I wasn't planning to. Sydney ended the call before Ethan could add a condition. At 3, her tools were lined up beside the main ranch gate. Chelsea had placed them there herself. She stood with her arms crossed while Sydney loaded the drill and socket set. You could have come inside, Chelsea said. I still have a key. Then why did you call Ethan instead of me? Because he owns the company now. Chelsea looked toward the house. He doesn't own me, I know. The red toolbox was lighter than it should have been. Sydney opened it. Her fencing pliers, wire cutters, measuring tape, and 2 wrench sets were missing. Where's the rest? That's what Ethan gave me. Those drawers were full. Then ask him. He knew I was coming. Chelsea's restraint slipped. He is arranging feed deliveries, speaking to the bank, and trying to keep this place running after burying his father. He may not remember every pair of pliers you've left in a shed. Sydney closed the toolbox. Chelsea held out an envelope. Your wages. Inside was a check. Sydney folded it without checking the amount. Thank you. Are you really sleeping out there? Yes. In that filthy little shack? I cleaned it. Chelsea's mouth tightened. You don't have to prove anything. I need somewhere to live. We said we'd help with an apartment. Ethan said he'd ask. And you couldn't wait one day? Sydney lifted the toolbox into the truck. One day for what? For everyone to calm down. I'm calm. You're moving into a ruin because you're hurt. Sydney turned to face her. Those things can both be true. Chelsea had no quick answer. She looked into the truck bed and saw Walt's rusted lantern beside the supplies. Did you take his whole box out there? Yes. Why? It was his cabin. It was a line camp. Walter didn't live there. He did every summer. He stayed there when he was being stubborn. Sydney shut the tailgate. Then it suits me. She drove away before Chelsea could decide whether that was an insult. At the hardware store, Nora Bell examined a photograph of the barometer on Sydney's phone. She was a heavy-set woman with silver hair pinned at the back of her neck and a pencil behind one ear. Don't take the dial apart, Nora said. That's an aneroid instrument. There's a sealed metal chamber inside. If you bend the linkage, you'll spend more replacing it than it's worth. I'm trying to remove the back. Oil the screw. Wait overnight. What about the brass tube along the bottom? Nora enlarged the photograph. That's decorative. Something's inside it. Then it didn't come from the maker that way. Sydney looked at her. How can you tell? The end caps are wrong. See that seam? Somebody fitted those later. Nora found a set of small screwdrivers, a bottle of penetrating oil, cotton cloth, and a jar of brass cleaner. Go easy on that, she said. Old things don't need to look new. They just need to work. Sydney paid with part of her wage check after cashing it at the bank. She bought groceries, lamp oil, 2 batteries, a door latch, and a foam sleeping pad from the outdoor store. By the time she returned, Brian had left a stack of split pine beside the porch. There was also a paper sack containing potatoes, onions, coffee, and a cast iron skillet. A note on top said, "Fence work starts when the mud lets us." Sydney carried everything inside. She installed the latch before dark. Then she cleared the workbench and laid the barometer on a folded shirt. She put 1 drop of oil around the C's screw. Waiting overnight would have been sensible. Sydney waited 20 minutes. The screw turned. She removed the back panel slowly. The ordinary mechanism sat behind the dial, a small round metal chamber connected to levers and springs. Nothing had fallen loose. Nothing there was large enough to make the sound she'd heard. The lower brass tube was separate from the instrument. 2 narrow brackets held it against the wooden case. One bracket had been tightened over a strip of felt to stop it rattling. Sydney loosened the brackets. The tube came free. One end was capped by a corroded brass fitting. Its edges showed old marks from a pair of pliers. Sydney wrapped it in cloth and turned gently. It didn't move. She added oil to the seam, waited, and tried again. The fitting shifted. Sydney stopped breathing for a moment. Then she turned it another 1/4 inch. The cap came away in her hand. The tube was hollow. Inside, just beyond the opening, she could see the dark edge of something tightly rolled. Sydney used tweezers from the screwdriver kit and drew it out carefully. The roll was wrapped in oilskin and tied with faded thread. A small brass token followed it, dropping into her palm. Stamped on one side were the letters W.H.S. Beneath them was the year 1971. Sydney set the token down and untied the thread. The oilskin opened around a folded scrap of paper. It was a hand-drawn map, done in Walt's square, careful lines. A creek crossed the lower corner. A row of marks climbed toward a shape that might have been a ridge or a boundary. The paper ended along one clean cut, leaving half the drawing missing. Wrapped inside it was a narrower note. Sydney recognized the handwriting before she read the words. Home is where the water starts. She read it twice. Then she looked toward the dark window, where the sound of Willow Creek entered through the imperfect frame. For the first time since the will meeting, Sydney didn't feel merely left behind. Someone had placed this in Walt's barometer, sealed it there, and expected a person to open it. She put the map, the token, and the note beneath the lamp. Then she reached for one of Walt's stained notebooks and began paying attention. The first notebook contained rainfall totals from 1986, a list of veterinary bills, and several pages of measurements Sydney couldn't place. She opened the next one. Most of it concerned cattle. Walt had recorded ear tag numbers, breeding dates, weights, and pasture rotations. Near the middle, he had drawn a rough line with arrows showing water flowing from a spring to 3 holding ponds. Nothing matched the map on the workbench. The third notebook had lost its cover. Sydney turned each page beneath the lamp. 2 grocery lists, an address in Sheridan, a recipe for liniment, and a reminder to call Monica. That was all. Sydney checked the backs of the pages. She held them near the light, looking for writing pressed into the paper. At some point after midnight, she realized she had read the same fence repair list 4 times. She folded the map into its oilskin, placed the brass token beside it, and went to sleep on the foam pad near the stove. When she woke, Brian was outside striking the iron intake screen with a length of pipe. The creek had risen overnight. Muddy water pushed leaves and twigs against the bars. Sydney pulled on her boots and went out. "You could knock," she said. "I did yesterday." "What's wrong?" "Water's backing into the side channel." She took the other end of the pipe. Together they worked it through the screen. A packed mat of grass broke free and spun downstream. Brian watched the water settle. "That happen often?" Sydney asked. "Not here." "What changed?" "Could be the storm." "You don't think it's the storm?" "I didn't say that." "You came before breakfast. I've been awake since 4. That isn't an answer." Brian looked at her. "You've got Walt's habit of asking a question until somebody gives up." Sydney wiped mud from the pipe. "I found something." He followed her inside. She closed the door and placed the oilskin on the workbench. Brian didn't touch it. He leaned over the map, moving his head with the lines. "Where was this?" "In the brass tube." "You opened it?" "With the advice you gave me. I told you to wait overnight." "I waited some of the night." Brian looked at the token next. He rubbed dirt from the stamped letters with his thumb. "WHS," he said, "could mean Walter Hansen Springs." "Did he use that name?" "Sometimes." "For the cabin?" "For the spring." "For all of this, depending on his mood." Sydney showed him the note. Brian read the line without speaking it aloud. "Do you recognize the map?" she asked. "Parts." He pointed to the creek in the lower corner. "That bends downstream of us. This line may be the old wagon track. Where does it go?" "Nowhere anymore. It went somewhere. Everything did." He turned the map so the cut edge faced him. "This isn't torn," I noticed. "Walt cut it with a straight blade. Other half could have been rolled separately. Why split a map? So one person finding one piece couldn't follow it. To what?" Brian gave her a patient look. "If I knew, we wouldn't need the other half." Sydney took the notebooks from the shelf and showed him Monica's name. This was mixed in with ordinary reminders. He called his sister most Sundays. "Do you think she knows?" "I think she knows more about Walt than anybody left." Brian returned the token to the workbench. "You should ask her yourself. Will she talk to me?" "She sent flowers to your father's funeral." "That isn't the same." "No. Talking costs less." Sydney knew Monica lived in a small brick house near Clear Creek, but she hadn't visited in almost a year. The distance wasn't personal. That was what Sydney had told herself. Monica's knees made driving difficult, and Sydney was always busy at the ranch. They exchanged birthday cards and occasional phone calls. Each assumed there would be time for a longer visit. Sydney picked up her phone. Brian caught her wrist before she could take a photograph of the map. "Don't send that." "Why?" "Because phones lose things in both directions." "That doesn't make sense." "It makes enough." He released her. "Take it with you. Keep it covered." Sydney studied him. "You think someone's looking for it?" "I think Walt hid it in a barometer, cut it in half, and told nobody who would have spoken to me. That's enough to be careful." Outside, tires passed slowly over the wet track. Brian moved first. A white pickup stopped beside Sydney's truck. Ethan got out. He wore a clean work coat and boots that hadn't been in the mud that morning. He looked toward Brian's truck, then at the cleared intake screen. "I called," he said. "My phone was inside. I came to see the roof." Brian stepped off the porch. "Roof's holding. I was asking Sydney." "No, you weren't," Sydney said. "You didn't ask anything." Ethan looked at her, then through the open cabin door. "What are you doing out here, Brian? Keeping branches out of my water. It isn't your water. Water rarely stays where it's told." Ethan's mouth tightened. "I need a minute with my sister." Brian picked up his pipe. "I'll check the lower screen." Sydney waited until he was beyond the cottonwoods. Ethan climbed onto the porch. One board groaned beneath him. "This is worse than I remembered," he said. "It's better than yesterday. You put money into it?" "Some." "How much?" "Mine." "That's not what I asked." Sydney folded her arms. Ethan looked around the single room. His attention moved from the stove to the sleeping pad, then to the workbench. The oilskin was partly covered by Walt's shirt. One corner of the map showed. Sydney stepped between him and the bench. His eyes settled on the barometer. "You fixed it?" "Not yet." "What did you take apart?" "The back." "Why?" "Because something was loose." Ethan glanced at the screwdriver set. "Anything important?" Sydney's body answered before she did. Her shoulders stiffened. Her right hand moved closer to the map. Ethan noticed. He had spent enough years bargaining over cattle to recognize when someone protected information. He didn't know what Sydney had found. Until that moment, he hadn't truly believed the barometer mattered. Now he knew only that she didn't want him near it. "What was inside?" he asked. "Part of the casing. That's all?" "That's all you need to know." His expression changed. "Why are you talking to me like that? You drove out here without calling first." "I did call. You came because Brian was here." "I didn't know Brian was here. You saw his tracks from the road." Ethan looked through the window toward the creek. "I came because Chelsea is worried. Chelsea left my tools beside the gate. She thought you wanted space. She wanted me outside. She's grieving. So am I." "I know. Do you?" Ethan pulled off his hat and rubbed the damp band between his fingers. "I don't want to fight with you." "Then don't. Come back to the house." "For how long?" "We'll figure it out." There's that answer again. "I'm trying to help. You're trying to move me somewhere easier to manage." "That's not fair." Sydney was tired of hearing that word from the person holding everything. Ethan set his hat back on. "Chelsea thinks you might be trying to make some kind of claim on this place. I'm living here. That's not a claim." "Then she shouldn't be worried. It's part of the ranch." "Is it?" The question left Sydney before she understood why she had asked it. Ethan stared at her. "As far as I know," she added. "What does that mean?" "It means I haven't read the deed." "I have." "Did it name this cabin?" "Deeds don't name buildings." "Did it include this ground?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. The ranch description had been read aloud at the will meeting, but it used section numbers, quarter sections, boundary calls, and old survey language. Sydney hadn't followed it. Ethan had been more interested in the total acreage than the uneven line at the northern edge. "I'll have Peter check," he said. Sydney heard the change. He was no longer asking her to come home. He was checking what she might have. "That would be smart," she said. Ethan looked once more at the covered workbench. "Don't make any permanent changes until we know. I installed a door latch. Structures. I'm keeping rain off the floor. Just wait, for you to decide if I'm allowed to be dry." "That isn't what I said." Brian returned before Ethan could continue. He carried a branch tangled with faded blue survey ribbon. "This was caught below the bend," he said. Ethan looked at it. "What is that?" "Old marker." "From where?" Brian shrugged. Water moved it. Ethan took the branch, inspected the ribbon, and tossed it beside the porch. "I'll call you later," he told Sydney. "No. Send me a copy of the deed description." "Why?" "Because I asked." He looked at Brian, then back at her. "All right." Ethan drove away more slowly than he had arrived. Brian waited until the truck disappeared. "You didn't tell him?" "No." "Good." Sydney looked at the blue ribbon on the ground. "Is that really old?" "Old enough to tear if you pull it." "Is it Walt's?" "Could be survey ribbon. Could be trash." "You brought it up at the right time." Brian picked up the branch. Good timing's mostly noticing who needs to leave. He had work waiting at his own ranch, so Sydney went to town alone. Monica's house sat on a quiet street behind a row of cottonwoods. The flower beds had been cleared for spring, though the morning was still too cold for planting. Sydney knocked and heard a chair move inside. Monica opened the door wearing a green cardigan and house shoes. She looked at Sydney for one long second. "You've lost weight," she said. "Hello to you too." "You have. Come in." The house smelled of cinnamon and furniture polish. Framed photographs covered one wall. Walt appeared in several, younger, darker-haired, and uncomfortable in every suit he had ever worn. Monica led Sydney to the kitchen. "I heard you left the ranch house. News travels fast." Chelsea called me. "When?" "Yesterday." Sydney stopped beside the table. "What did she want?" "To know if you'd contacted me." "What did you say?" "I asked why you would." "And?" "She said you were upset and going through Walter's old things." Monica filled a kettle at the sink. Her movements were slow but exact. "She wanted to know if he ever promised you anything." Sydney took the oilskin packet from inside her coat. "What did you tell her?" "That Walter promised everybody something. Usually rain." Monica set down the kettle. Sydney unwrapped the map and placed the note beside it. For the first time since opening the door, Monica lost her composure. Her hand closed around the edge of the counter. "Where did you get that?" "Inside the Barometer." "You opened it?" "Yes." Monica sat. Sydney remained standing. "You knew something was there." "I knew he put something there. He wouldn't tell me what." "When?" "The year before he died." "What did he tell you?" Monica looked at the map but didn't touch it. "He said Gerald was letting other people think for him. He was worried about what would happen to the ranch after he was gone." "Other people meaning Chelsea?" "He didn't give me a list." "What about Devon?" "He mentioned Devon's appetite." "For what?" "Whatever somebody else had." Sydney pulled out the chair across from her. "Did Walt say anything about Ethan?" Monica's face softened with regret. "He said Ethan loved the ranch so much he might squeeze it to death." That sounded like Walt. It was too specific to be borrowed from anyone else. Sydney slid the map closer. "Brian thinks this was cut in half." "It was." "Where's the other half?" Monica looked toward the hallway. Sydney followed her gaze. "You have it." "I have something Walter left." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because he told me not to." "He's dead." "A promise doesn't die because one person does." "Then what were you waiting for?" Monica turned the note so the handwriting faced her. "He said someone might come looking before you were ready. He made me promise I wouldn't hand anything over just because they used the word family." Sydney thought of Chelsea's call. Then she thought of Ethan standing inside the cabin, watching her hand move toward the map. "How were you supposed to know when I was ready?" Monica met her eyes. "You were supposed to bring me his words." She rose and went down the hallway. When she returned, she carried a sealed brown envelope. Walt had written Sydney's name across the front. Monica didn't release it at once. "If this leads to land, money, or a fight, they'll come at you differently," she said. "Some will sound kind, some will sound frightened. The frightened ones may do more damage. You don't know what it leads to." "No, neither do you." Sydney held the envelope between them. "That's why I came." Monica let go. Inside was another oilskin scrap. Sydney laid it beside the first. The cut edges met exactly. The completed map showed Willow Creek twisting through the lower ground, the line camp beside it, and a dotted trail climbing behind the cabin. At the top, Walt had drawn a square beneath a cluster of marks that looked like fallen stone. Brian had been wrong about one thing. The map didn't lead to the place where the water ran past the cabin. It led uphill to the place where the water came out of the earth. Beside the square, Walt had written 2 words: "First house." Monica read them over Sydney's shoulder. "That was the spring house," she said. "You remember it?" "I remember the stones. The building was gone before your father was grown." "What happened to it?" "Part of the slope came down after a wet spring. Walter said the roof gave way first. Your great-grandfather had already moved everyone into the main house by then." Sydney traced the dotted line from the cabin to the square. "Did Walt ever dig there?" "Not that I saw." "Did he talk about it?" "Only once." Monica went to the stove and turned off the kettle. She had forgotten it was boiling. "He said the first house held the beginning of everything." "I thought he meant the family." Walter liked to sound mysterious when he had no intention of explaining himself. "Did he say when?" "It was the same year he gave me the envelope." Sydney folded the joined map carefully. "I need to go." "You need to eat." "I'm not hungry." That answer runs in the family. It's never true. Monica made 2 cheese sandwiches and wrapped one for Sydney to take. While they ate, she asked where Sydney was sleeping, whether the stove drew properly, and whether Brian still ignored his bad leg. Then she asked, "Does Ethan know you found the map?" "He knows I found something. That may be enough." Sydney looked at the hallway where the envelope had been kept. "Why did Chelsea call you before I did?" Because she knew Walter trusted me. Did she know about the envelope? No. You're sure? She circled the subject for 15 minutes. People don't circle what they already have. Monica took Sydney's empty plate. Don't show her the whole map. I wasn't planning to show anyone. You showed Brian. He helped me open the barometer. That wasn't my question. Sydney folded the sandwich wrapper into a square. I trust him. Monica nodded once. Then be sure he knows what that costs. The road back to Willow Creek had dried enough for Sydney to drive faster. Even so, she slowed at every rise, checking her mirror. No one followed her. Brian's truck was gone when she reached the cabin. She called him and got his voicemail. I found the other half, she said. It points above the spring. Call me before you come over. She ended the message, then called again. And bring a shovel. He arrived an hour later with 2 shovels, a long steel probe, a coil of rope, and a face that said he had already decided she was moving too quickly. Sydney spread the map across the workbench. Brian leaned over it. First house, he read. You know where it was? Roughly? That means yes. It means the slope moved. When? Before I worked for Walt. He showed me the old foundation once when we cleared brush. Why? Because I asked why there were square stones in the hill. What did he say? That people kept building too close to water, then blamed the water? Brian studied the map again. This square might be the foundation. Or it might be a spring box. What's the difference? A foundation held a building. A spring box collected water before it entered a pipe. Could either hold something else, if somebody put something there. Sydney showed him the joined cut. Walt wanted this found. He wanted you to have a map. That isn't the same as telling you to dig into a wet hillside. What do you suggest? We look first. The dotted trail no longer existed, but the ground behind the cabin still rose between 2 lines of willows. They climbed slowly, stepping around slick stones and old roots. Brian carried the probe. Sydney kept the map inside her coat. The sound of the creek changed as they climbed. Below the cabin, it ran over gravel. Near the spring, it moved beneath stone before appearing in narrow, clear channels. 20 minutes up, Brian stopped beside a leaning pine. This was the wagon track. Sydney saw only a shallow shelf covered in grass. How can you tell? Ground's too level. They followed it toward a pile of broken rock. At first, the pile looked natural. Then Sydney saw one stone with a flat face and a squared corner. Another lay beneath it at a right angle. Brian pushed the probe into the soil. It went down nearly 2 feet before striking something hard. He moved 3 feet left and tried again. This time, it struck stone after 6 inches. Wall, he said. Sydney looked over the rockfall. Where do we start? We don't. You brought shovels. For looking. I looked. Brian rested both hands on the probe. If this is the old spring house, the back wall could be holding the hill. You pull the wrong stone, it comes down. So, we pull the right one. That confidence comes from never having a hill land on you. What do we need? My small excavator. Timber. Maybe the winch. When can you bring it? Tomorrow, if the lower crossing's firm. Sydney knelt beside the exposed corner. Moss covered the top, but beneath it were chisel marks. Walt came here, she said. He owned the ranch. He came everywhere. He drew this. Yes. He split the map, put half in a barometer, and gave the other half to Monica. Yes. So, what are we still deciding? Brian looked down the hill toward the cabin. Whether finding something is the same as being ready for it. Sydney stood. Did Monica call you? No. You sound like her. Monica has good sense. She sat on half a map for 8 years. She kept a promise for 8 years. Sydney pulled off her gloves. I don't have anywhere else to go, Brian. Ethan owns the ranch, Chelsea owns the house, and Devin owns enough equipment to sell before lunch. I got a box because they were embarrassed to leave me with nothing. If Walt hid something here, even if it's only another note, I need to know. Brian's eyes moved to the map inside her coat. This isn't only curiosity. No. All right. He picked up the probe. We shore the opening. We don't work alone. If I say the bank's moving, you don't argue. I can agree to 2 of those. You can agree to all 3, or I take my excavator home. Sydney put her gloves back on. All 3. They spent the rest of the afternoon marking the old wall. The foundation was smaller than the cabin below. One side had collapsed completely, but 2 corners remained under the rock. Sydney found a length of rusted pipe running downhill. Brian cleared dirt from it. Old spring line. Does it connect to the creek? Everything here connects to the creek. Near sunset, Sydney's phone chimed. Ethan had sent a scanned copy of the deed description. Beneath it, he had written, "Peter says all acreage in Dad's name transferred to me. The cabin appears to sit inside the outer ranch boundary. Don't make changes until we verify." Sydney showed Brian. He enlarged the survey page. "This line here," he said. "What about it?" "It follows the creek, then cuts west at a marker." "The creek is the boundary?" "For part of it." "Where's the cabin?" "Depends which old channel they used." Sydney looked toward the water. Willow Creek had changed course more than once. Dry gravel beds crossed the lower pasture. One old bend ran behind the cabin, while the present channel ran in front. If Ethan's deed uses the old channel, does he own this ground? Maybe. And if it uses the new one? Maybe not. That's helpful. It's land. Helpful costs extra. He handed back the phone. "Before we dig, you should check the county records. If I ask for the spring parcel, Ethan will hear. In Buffalo, he might hear if you ask for directions to the restroom, so we dig first." Brian considered the foundation. "We make one opening. We don't disturb the water." The next morning, he drove his compact excavator down the old track on a flatbed. The machine was small enough to pass between the cottonwoods, but heavy enough to sink in soft ground. Sydney laid scrap boards beneath its tracks, while Brian guided it across. They worked by hand near the wall. Sydney removed loose stones and stacked them away from the slope. Brian cut 2 timbers and braced them between the surviving corners. Every few minutes, he stopped to watch the seepage. By noon, they had uncovered the top of a narrow chamber behind the foundation. It wasn't part of the spring box. Its stones were dry and tightly fitted. Sydney knelt and cleared dirt from a flat slab. There was an iron ring set into the center. Brian crouched beside her. "That wasn't built with the house," he said. "How can you tell?" "The mortar's newer. Newer by how much?" "Could be 50 years. Could be 10. Sydney wrapped the rope through the ring. The slab didn't move when they pulled by hand. Brian attached the line to the excavator bucket and lifted until the seal broke with a low grinding sound. Cold air came out of the opening. The cavity beneath was only 3 feet deep. A metal box sat inside, covered with an oilcloth sheet and raised above the floor on 2 bricks. Sydney reached toward it. Brian caught the back of her coat. "Check the stones." She pressed each side with the steel probe. Nothing moved. Brian let go. Together they lifted the box out. It was green steel, the kind once used for deeds and cash records. Rust marked the corners, but the lid was intact. A brass plate on top carried the same letters as the token. WHS. Sydney took the token from her pocket. It fit into a round depression beside the latch. She pressed it down. Something clicked inside the lid. Brian sat back on his heels. Your grandfather had time on his hands. He made time. The keyhole beneath the latch was small. Sydney searched the oilcloth and the bottom of the cavity. No key. Brian lifted the box and listened. Don't shake it. I'm moving it. That was shaking. He set it down. Could be the token released one lock and the key releases another. Sydney examined the brass token. A narrow line ran around its edge. She turned it between both hands. The token separated into 2 pieces. A small steel key was fitted inside. Brian looked offended. He could have labeled that. Sydney inserted the key. The lock resisted once, then opened. The strongbox smelled of old paper, oilcloth, and metal. On top lay a sealed envelope with Sydney's name. Beneath it were 2 document folders wrapped separately in waxed cloth. She opened the envelope first. Sydney, if you found this, you fixed what others threw aside. That tells me enough to let you read the rest. She stopped. Brian looked toward the hill, giving her the privacy of not watching too closely. Sydney continued. The first house stood where the water begins. The family moved downhill, but everything they built still depends on what rises here. I kept this piece separate because land gets divided faster than responsibility does. There was more, but Sydney's eyes had begun moving ahead. She saw Gerald's name, then Chelsea's, then Ethan's. I watched your father grow tired of saying no. I watched the family arrange itself around whoever spoke with the most certainty. You were young, but you came to the spring without being told. You checked the screens. You closed gates behind you. You listened before you decided what an animal or a person needed. Sydney pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth. Walt had noticed, not in the vague way people praised a girl for helping. He had noticed the screens and the gates. The letter ended with a direction. Read the documents, then find someone who understands water and has no reason to flatter a Hansen. Brian glanced back when the paper lowered. What does it say? That you're not allowed to explain the documents. Good. I didn't want to. Sydney unwrapped the first folder. Inside was a heavy certificate with an embossed seal. The heading named the Wyoming State Engineer's Office. The filing date was in 1971. Walter Hansen's name appeared as the holder of a water right at Willow Creek Spring. The description covered 40 acres. Sydney read it once, understanding the individual words, but not what they meant together. The second folder held a notarized document dated the year before Walt died. Restated Hansen Springs. Trust appeared across the top. She turned past the formal language until she found a page marked Beneficiary. Her own name was there, Sydney Diane Hansen, sole beneficiary. Below it was her birth date and a description of the same 40-acre spring parcel. Brian sat beside her now. Does that mean it's mine? She asked. It means Walt wanted it to be. That isn't the same. No. She looked downhill toward the cabin, the current channel, and the ranch beyond the trees. Ethan had inherited every acre Gerald owned. This document said Gerald had never owned these 40 acres at all. Sydney gathered the papers before the wind could lift them. We need someone who understands water, she said. Brian looked at the old certificate. I know who to call. Before he could reach for his phone, an engine sounded on the lower track. It wasn't Ethan's white pickup. A dark truck stopped beside the cabin, and Devin stepped out. He stood with the truck door open and stared at the excavator on the hill. What are you doing? He called. Sydney closed the strongbox and pulled the oilcloth over it. Repairing the spring house. That's not the spring house. It used to be. Devin climbed the trail in polished boots that slid on the wet ground. He grabbed branches for balance and swore when one snapped back against his coat. Brian moved the document folders behind the box. Devin reached the foundation, breathing hard. What's in there? Old papers, Sydney said. What papers? Walt's. Devin looked at the open stone chamber, then at the strongbox. His eyes stayed on the brass plate. You found that here? Yes. Because of the barometer? Sydney didn't answer. That was answer enough. Devin crouched beside the box. Brian placed one hand on the lid. Don't, Brian said. I'm looking. Look without touching. Devin straightened. This isn't your property. Could say the same to you. My family owns this ranch. Brian glanced at Sydney. Which part of your family? Devin turned to her. Ethan said you were hiding something. Ethan said he didn't know what I found. He knows you found a map. Sydney watched his face. I never told him that. Devin looked toward the cabin. The mistake bothered him, but only briefly. He had come with a purpose, and pressure had been following him longer than Sydney understood. Fine, he said. He guessed. No. Someone told him. Maybe he saw it. It was covered. Devin put both hands in his coat pockets. Can we talk without Brian standing there? No. This is family business. Brian helped uncover the box. That doesn't make him family. No. It makes him useful. Brian picked up the steel probe. I'll check the brace. He moved a few yards away, close enough to hear if Sydney called. Devin watched him go. I came to make you an offer? For what? The cabin. The stuff from Walt's box. All of it. You laughed at the stuff in Walt's box. I was being stupid. That part's true. I'm serious, Sydney. He took an envelope from his inside pocket and held it out. She didn't take it. What's in there? A cashier's check. For how much? $15,000. Sydney looked at him. 2 days earlier, he had called the barometer worthless. Now he had climbed a muddy hill carrying $15,000. Where did you get that? It doesn't matter. It does if you expect me to take it. I sold something. What? One of the trailers. You inherited those to support the ranch. I inherited them. That means I can sell them. Does Ethan know? Devin's mouth pulled tight. Sydney understood. No, it isn't his business. It will be when cattle need moving. I'm offering you more money than you've ever had. For a broken barometer and a shack. For an easy exit. Easy for who? For everybody. Sydney looked at the envelope again. How much do you owe? Devin's eyes narrowed. Who told you? No one. Then don't guess. Monica said Walt worried about your appetite. Monica doesn't know anything about me. She knew enough for that to bother you. Devin turned away. He walked to the edge of the foundation and looked down at the creek. It's temporary, he said. What is? The debt. Debt isn't temporary because you call it that. You sound like Ethan. How much? He rubbed both hands over his face. About 60,000. Sydney said nothing. Devin looked back at her. It wasn't one night. It got away from me. Betting? Sports, mostly. Mostly? A few card games. Does Chelsea know? She knows there's debt. Does she know how much? She knows enough. The inheritance made a different kind of sense now. The checking account, the trucks, the equipment, the assets that could be turned into money quickly, all of them had gone to Devin. Ethan had received land and obligations. Chelsea had received the house. Nothing liquid had gone to Sydney because Devin needed everything that could be sold without waiting. Did Dad know? She asked. Not the final number. What number did he know? 20. And he still gave you the checking account? Devin looked ashamed, but not surprised. He had asked himself the same question and accepted the answer because he needed it. Mom said, I needed a clean start. Sydney felt something settle inside her. This wasn't Dad's idea. He signed the will. That isn't what I said. Devin held out the envelope again. Take the money. Go to Casper or Sheridan. Get an apartment. Go back to school if you want. You don't even like being around Chelsea. You haven't answered me. Mom talked to him. Ethan talked to him. Everybody talked to him. About leaving me out? About keeping the ranch together and giving you everything you could sell. I'm trying to fix my life. With Walt's barometer? With whatever's in that box. There it was. No concern, no sentiment, no cleanup. Devin didn't know what Sydney had found, but he believed it might be worth enough to cover what he owed. He was offering a quarter of his debt because he hoped the truth was worth more. You don't know what's in there, she said. Neither do you. I've read it. His attention sharpened. Then tell me. No. Is it money? No. Land? Sydney lifted the strongbox. Devin stepped toward her. Brian turned from the brace. Sydney held the box against her chest. Go home, she said. You can't keep family property. It wasn't in Gerald's house. It wasn't on Gerald's inventory. You didn't even know it existed. Walt was our grandfather. He was not your grandfather. The word stopped him. Devin had been brought into the family when Chelsea married Gerald. Walt had treated him fairly, but Devin was Chelsea's son from before the marriage. He had called Walter by his name, never Granddad. Sydney didn't enjoy saying it. She also wasn't going to let him rewrite their relationships to reach inside a strongbox. He was part of my family, Devin said. Then you shouldn't have laughed when Chelsea brought out his things. Devin put the envelope back inside his coat. You're making a mistake. Maybe. You don't know what people do when they need money. I'm learning. He looked at Brian, then down toward his truck. Mom won't let you stay here once she knows you're digging. She doesn't own this. You'd better be sure. He walked down the trail without another word. Brian waited until the truck left. You all right? No. Good answer. Sydney looked at the strongbox. I need to ask Chelsea what she did. You think she'll tell you? I think Devin already did. They carried the documents to Brian's truck. He had a locking metal compartment behind the seat and offered to keep them there until Sydney spoke to an attorney. Sydney refused. They have my name on them. That doesn't keep them dry. I have the strongbox. That has a hole in one corner. I'll wrap it. Brian didn't argue again. He helped her lower it into the locked toolbox in her truck bed. I'll call James Martinez, he said. He handled my water filing. When? Today. Don't send him copies yet. I won't. Sydney drove directly to the main house. Chelsea was in the kitchen sorting Gerald's medications into a paper bag for disposal. The ordinary sight of it made Sydney stop. His name was printed on every bottle. Some were nearly full. Chelsea looked up. Devin says you found something. He got back fast. He called. Did he mention offering me $15,000? Chelsea went still. He what? A cashier's check. He sold one of the trailers. That trailer was his. Ethan won't see it that way. Chelsea tied the bag closed. What did you find? Sydney sat across from her. Why did Dad leave me nothing? We have been through this. No. You told me he wanted to protect the ranch. I want to know what you said to him." Chelsea carried the bag to the counter. "Your father made his own decisions. What did you say?" I reminded him that Ethan had spent his adult life preparing to run the company, so had I. You were 20 when the will was signed. I was working full-time. You were still changing your mind every other month. About what? School, town, whether you wanted to stay here? I talked about taking one accounting class. You talked about leaving. For class? Chelsea turned. And if you had inherited land, what then? You could have sold it, married someone who wanted a piece, forced a division. Gerald couldn't take that chance. Ethan could sell. Ethan would never leave the ranch. No. He'd mortgage it until the bank owned it. Chelsea's eyes hardened. You don't understand what it costs to keep this place. I understand what it cost me. You are young enough to build something else. And Devin? The kitchen became quiet. Sydney leaned forward. You knew about the gambling. I knew he had made mistakes. You knew he needed cash. He needed a way out before the debt ruined him. So, you gave him Dad's checking account and equipment? I asked Gerald to help all three of you according to your needs. All three? You needed freedom. Sydney stared at her. Chelsea believed that sentence, or had repeated it until belief no longer mattered. You called being left with nothing freedom. You weren't left with nothing. Ethan was supposed to help you get established. There's nothing in the will requiring that. Chelsea's expression shifted. She had known. She had counted on family pressure doing what the legal document did not. Gerald trusted Ethan, she said. Dad was tired. Don't. Walt saw it years ago. Dad got tired of saying no, so you kept asking. Chelsea gripped the back of a chair. I spent 16 years in this house without knowing whether Gerald's blood family would decide I was temporary. Walter never let me forget the ranch came from before me. Ethan had a place because he was the son. You had a place because Walter adored you. Devin and I had whatever Gerald chose to give us, so you made sure he gave you everything first. I made sure I could not be put out of my home after my husband died. I made sure my son had assets in his own name. I made sure Ethan could keep the ranch intact. Yes, I pushed for the will. Yes, I told Gerald that dividing land with you was dangerous. I told him you would recover faster than the rest of us. You told him I didn't need anything. I told him you would survive. Sydney sat back. Every earlier kindness now had an edge. Chelsea offering to ask about an apartment. Chelsea calling Monica. Chelsea leaving the tools at the gate. She wanted Sydney safe enough not to look abandoned, but separate enough not to claim a place. Did Dad agree with you? Sydney asked. Chelsea looked toward Gerald's empty chair. He stopped arguing. That was the complete answer, not agreement, not a plan for Sydney's future. Gerald had been worn down by debt, expansion, Devin's trouble, and Chelsea's fear. Ethan wanted control. Devin wanted money. Chelsea wanted a house no Hanson could take and enough assets to save her son. Sydney's share had become the easiest thing to remove because everyone else needed something more loudly. What did you find? Chelsea asked again. Sydney stood. Something Walt didn't leave to Dad. Fear crossed Chelsea's face before she could hide it. Then, it may not be valid. I didn't say what it was. You said it came from Walter. You called Monica before you knew that. Chelsea didn't answer. Sydney moved toward the mudroom. Behind her, Chelsea said, If this affects the ranch, Ethan has a right to know. He has a right to learn it the same way I did. And how is that? After everyone else has already decided what belongs to him. Sydney left through the porch door. Her phone rang before she reached the truck. Brian's name appeared on the screen. She answered. Martinez can meet tomorrow, he said. He wants the original papers. Sydney looked back at the house. Chelsea stood at the kitchen window with her phone in her hand. I'll bring them, Sydney said. Brian was waiting at the cabin before sunrise. Sydney placed the strongbox behind her truck seat, then checked the doors twice. She had slept with the key inside her sock. It wasn't comfortable, but comfort had moved down her list. They took Brian's truck to Sheridan. He drove with both hands low on the wheel, and the heater turned higher than necessary. You trust Martinez? Sydney asked. With my water filing. That wasn't what I asked. I trust him to tell us what the papers mean. Trusting him beyond that costs lunch. Does he work for Crown Peak? No. Ethan? Not that I know. What about Chelsea? Brian glanced at her. James has practiced water law in this county longer than Chelsea's been a Hanson. Everybody has asked him something. That doesn't help. It means ask him directly. James Martinez kept an office above a pharmacy in downtown Sheridan. The waiting room had 2 chairs, a dead plant, and a framed photograph of a trout that looked disappointed to be there. He came out before Sydney had finished the intake form. Brian, James, they shook hands. Martinez looked at Sydney and then at the strongbox. You brought the originals. Yes. Good. Come in. His office was plain, except for rolled survey maps standing in a wooden rack. Sydney set the box on a conference table. Martinez put on cotton gloves before touching anything. He read Walt's letter first. Then he examined the certificate beneath a bright desk lamp. He checked the embossed seal, the signature, and the filing marks on the back. Have you cleaned this? He asked. No, keep it that way. He opened the trust and read each page. The silence lasted long enough for Sydney to hear the pharmacy's front door chime downstairs. Finally, Martinez looked up. Where did you find these? In a steel box under the old Springhouse Foundation. Who saw you remove it? Brian? Anyone else? Devin arrived afterward. He saw the box, but not the papers. Did you photograph the cavity before moving anything? Sydney looked at Brian. Brian took out his phone. I did. He had photographed the stone chamber, the oilcloth, the box on its bricks, and Sydney lifting the lid. The images showed the brass plate and the condition of the documents. Martinez nodded. Keep the original files. Send copies to me. Are they real? Sydney asked. They appear real? That sounds expensive. It's cautious. Real and enforceable are different questions. He placed the water certificate beside the trust. This certificate records a permitted and adjudicated water right filed by Walter Hansen in 1971. It identifies Willow Creek Spring as the source and describes a beneficial use across the Hansen Springs parcel. What does adjudicated mean? It means the state examined the claim and recognized it. In ordinary language, Walt didn't just say the water was his, he went through the process and received a formal right. Does it cover the 40 acres? The water right serves the 40 acres. Land and water rights are connected in Wyoming, but the records have to match. We need the parcel history, the trust documents, and the state engineer's record. Martinez opened a county database on his computer. The internet was slow. He waited without apologizing for it. A property index appeared. He entered Walter Hansen's name and narrowed the dates. Sydney stood behind his chair. A deed recorded decades earlier showed a 40-acre parcel separated from the larger Hansen Ranch. The boundary followed an old channel of Willow Creek, then climbed to the spring. A later document transferred the parcel into the Hansen Springs Trust. Martinez opened the scanned image. There, he said. Walt had kept the land in his own name when other ranch acreage passed to Gerald. Years later, he had deeded the spring parcel to the trust. The transfer carried a county recording stamp. So, Gerald never owned it, Sydney said. Not according to this chain. Then Ethan didn't inherit it, not through Gerald's will. Brian leaned over the boundary image, cabins inside. Martinez traced the old channel. The cabin, the head spring, and most of the Upper Creek corridor appear to be inside the trust parcel. Sydney sat down. The place she had chosen because no one wanted it had never belonged to the estate they divided. Does the trust belong to me? She asked. A trust doesn't belong to a beneficiary the same way a truck belongs to its owner. It holds property for someone under written terms. Am I that someone? You are the named sole beneficiary. The document also names Walt as the original trustee and provides for a successor. Who? Martinez turned several pages. Monica Jensen. Sydney hadn't seen that line. Does Monica know? You'll have to ask her. What happens when she dies? The document allows the beneficiary to appoint a qualified successor after reaching adulthood. That would be you appointing a bank, attorney, or another eligible trustee. It also allows Monica to transfer trusteeship now. Can she sell the land? Not for her own benefit. She has to act for yours and follow the trust purpose. What's the purpose? Martinez found the paragraph. To preserve Hansen Springs, maintain its water right, and provide a residence or livelihood for Walter Hansen's designated descendant. Sydney looked at Walt's letter on the table. Why hide any of this? That isn't a legal question. Can you answer it anyway? Martinez considered. Walt recorded the land transfer. It wasn't secret from the county. But he kept the trust terms and original certificate where your family wouldn't find them easily. He may have believed possession mattered. Possession of the paper? possession of the knowledge. He called the state engineer's office while they sat there. He gave the certificate number, priority date, source, and parcel description. The employee on the other end confirmed a matching record and emailed a scanned copy. Martinez put it on the screen beside Walt's original. The certificate numbers matched. So did the volume, use, and survey description. He then requested a certified copy, which would arrive by courier the following day. "Is it senior?" Brian asked. "Very." "To mine?" "By 11 years. Brian whistled softly. Sidney looked between them. "Explain that." "In a shortage, older rights are generally satisfied before newer rights," Martinez said. "Brian's right is junior to this one. So are the irrigation rights attached to most of the present Hanson Ranch. Ethan uses water from this spring, then he may depend on releases or diversions governed by this right. Can I shut it off?" Martinez's face stayed neutral. "That is the wrong first question. I'm not saying I will." "Good. Water isn't a faucet you own because you found a certificate. Use is regulated. You cannot waste it, enlarge it beyond the recognized use, or harm other lawful users at will. But if this right is active and properly maintained, nobody can lease, transfer, or change its use without involving the trust." Sidney understood that part. Ethan could own the cattle, the company, and Gerald's land. He still couldn't promise anyone the spring. Martinez checked the maintenance filings. Walt had kept them current through his death. Monica, as successor trustee, had signed the later reports. "She knew," Sidney said. "She knew about the trust, but she acted like she didn't know what the map led to." "Both can be true," Brian said. "She knew there was land in the trust. She didn't know where Walt put the originals." Sidney called Monica from the conference room. Her great-aunt answered on the fourth ring. "Did you find the first house?" she asked. "We found the papers." Monica was quiet. "Why didn't you tell me you were trustee? Walter told me the trust was yours when you came asking with his words. He wanted you to find the reason before somebody handed you the result. You signed water reports. Once a year. James mailed them. I signed them. You knew I had land. I knew the trust held land for you. I didn't know what it controlled. Walter said the papers would explain. Will you transfer trusteeship if James says you're ready?" Martinez heard. "I'll prepare it," Monica said. "Then yes." Sidney lowered the phone. Martinez gave her a simple list. "Secure the originals. Photograph every page. Obtain the certified state record. Record Monica's trustee transfer. Inspect the diversion works. Notify no outside user until they knew whether anyone had filed a conflicting change." Then he said, "We also need an independent valuation. I'm not selling. A valuation doesn't require a sale. Who values a spring? Someone who buys access to water." He made a call to Alexander Pham at Crown Peak Cattle Company. Pham agreed to meet that afternoon at Crown Peak's regional office outside Buffalo. He didn't sound eager, he sounded precise. His office faced a broad stretch of irrigated ground. Maps covered one wall, each marked with colored lines and small numbered tabs. Pham read the certified database copy Martinez had sent ahead. Sidney placed the original certificate on his desk, but kept her hand near it, he noticed. "I won't remove it," he said. "What does Crown Peak want with Willow Creek? Reliable late-season water? For cattle? For hay, cattle, and future grazing leases? On Hanson land? Across several holdings?" Pham asked about the spring flow, the diversion screens, and whether the original beneficial use continued. Brian answered what he knew. Sidney answered what she had seen. Pham called one of Crown Peak's water engineers into the room. They compared the priority date with the company's valley map. The engineer pointed to 3 downstream diversions. "If this filing is active at the recorded volume, it sits ahead of all of these." "Including the Hanson Ranch?" Sidney asked. "Yes." Pham dismissed the engineer, then folded his hands on the desk. "What would Crown Peak pay?" Sidney asked. "For the land alone, not much compared with the ranch around it. For control of the senior right, access corridor, and a long-term change approved by the state, the combined value could approach $4 million. Sidney thought she had misheard him. Brian didn't move. Pham continued before the number could become the whole conversation. "That does not mean I am offering you $4 million today. Approval takes time. Historic use must be proven. A buyer would discount legal risk. The trust may restrict a sale. I don't want to sell the spring. What do you want?" Sydney looked through the window at Crown Peak's irrigated field. She had spent the past week being told what each person needed from her. Ethan needed patience. Devin needed money. Chelsea needed security. Crown Peak needed water. "I want the cabin safe," she said. "I want Brian's cattle watered. I want the Hanson Ranch to stop treating me like I can be moved whenever I'm inconvenient. And I don't want anyone taking more out of that creek than it can carry." Pham leaned back. "That sounds like stewardship, not a sale. Can those things be written down?" "Yes." "Then that's what I'm interested in." Pham looked once more at the certificate. "If your title is confirmed, anyone negotiating for Willow Creek water will have to deal with you." Sydney returned the original to its folder. "Then don't tell them yet." Pham's eyes rested on her for a moment. "I won't disclose your documents, but you should know Crown Peak has received another inquiry involving water access on the Hanson acreage." "From Ethan?" "I'm not discussing another party's communication." The refusal answered her. Sydney closed the strongbox. "Don't agree to anything," she said. Pham stood. "Bring me proof of authority, and I'll deal with the rightful holder." By evening, Martinez had emailed the prepared trustee transfer. Monica signed it before a notary at her bank. Sydney signed the acceptance in Martinez's office. He filed it electronically with the county. A confirmation arrived 20 minutes later. Sydney read her name on the recorded notice, then placed the phone beside Walt's original certificate. The water right still needed its formal hearing. Crown Peak had made no offer she could accept. Ethan didn't yet know what she could stop, but Sydney now held the recorded authority to speak for Hanson Springs, and no one else did. The county notice arrived the next afternoon. It had been taped to the cabin door inside a clear plastic sleeve. Sydney saw the red heading before she parked. "Unsafe occupancy complaint." A county inspector waited in a tan vehicle near the gate. He introduced himself, showed his identification, and asked permission to enter. "Who filed it?" Sydney asked. "The complainant's name is on the second page, Chelsea Hanson." The complaint listed a failed roof, unapproved electrical work, no septic connection, unsafe heating, and possible foundation damage. It described the cabin as an abandoned ranch outbuilding being used illegally as a residence. "I don't have electricity," Sydney said. "That resolves one item. I have a working stove. I'll need to inspect it. What happens if I say no? I come back with an administrative order, and this takes longer." Sydney let him inside. He checked the stovepipe, windows, roof patch, floor, and door latch. He photographed the sagging corner and pressed a meter against the back sill. "The building needs work," he said. "I know. The stove clearance is acceptable. Roof needs a proper repair. You need a smoke detector and carbon monoxide detector today. I can do that. Water and sanitation will be the larger issue. The spring water's been used here for decades. Used and approved potable supply aren't the same thing." He wasn't cruel. That made the complaint more effective. Chelsea had found a process that could remove Sydney without anyone having to raise a voice. The inspector gave her 5 business days to submit a repair and occupancy plan. He did not order her out immediately, but he warned that the county could if the roof or sanitation failed inspection. Brian arrived while Sydney was reading the notice for the 3rd time. "Chelsea?" he asked. Sydney handed it to him. He read the list. "Your chimney's safer than hers. That probably won't help." "No." Sydney called Martinez. He listened, then asked her to photograph every page. "Do not ignore it," he said. "Comply with the safety items today. I'll speak to the county." "Can Chelsea do this if she doesn't own the cabin?" "Anyone can report a safety concern. Ownership matters when the county asks who has authority to repair it. So, she helped me prove I'm the person who does. Possibly. Don't thank her yet." He had other news. Ethan had contacted Crown Peak again. This time, he had submitted a proposed lease covering grazing access and irrigation rights along Willow Creek. The property description crossed the Hanson Springs boundary. "How do you know?" Sydney asked. Pham called. Ethan represented that the company controls all ranch water by continuous family use. He saw the trust filing. He may believe he can defeat it. "Can he sign away my water?" "No. He can create enough confusion to delay your recognition and frighten a buyer or lender. I don't want a buyer. Delay still helps him. The longer ownership remains disputed, the longer he operates as if nothing changed. What do we do?" "I'm requesting an expedited Johnson County Water Board hearing. The board can enter the local findings, recognize the trust's authority for the diversion, and send the record to the state engineer. Crown Peak won't close anything while that hearing is pending. When? Soon, if FAM confirms there is an active transaction. Sydney looked at Chelsea's complaint. She wants me out before the hearing, then stay compliant. Brian drove into town for detectors and roof brackets. Sydney spent the evening measuring the cabin and drawing a simple repair plan. She listed every material, estimated the cost, and attached photographs of the work already completed. She did not call Chelsea. Ethan called her. "You filed something against the ranch," he said. "I recorded a trustee change for land inside our boundary, not according to the county deed. Peter says that trust can be challenged. Then challenge it. You know what a hearing does to a business deal?" "What business deal?" He paused. Sydney waited. "A grazing arrangement," he said, "with Crown Peak. That isn't your concern. You included Willow Creek water. I included ranch water. You don't control the spring. We've used it for 50 years. That doesn't make the certificate yours." Ethan's voice lowered. "So, there is a certificate." Sydney looked at the barometer above the workbench. "You should ask Peter what he's actually seen. You're risking the ranch over an old piece of paper. You risked it before you knew I had one. I am trying to expand so we can carry the debt Dad left. And Crown Peak needs the spring. They need access. We need cash. It works for everyone. Did you ask Brian? Brian has a junior claim. Did you ask me? You didn't own anything when we started talking." Sydney let that sit between them. Ethan heard what he had said. He didn't take it back. "The hearing's Friday," he said. "Peter will ask the board to recognize continuous ranch control. If you withdraw your filing, I can still offer you the apartment. Does Chelsea know you're offering my housing in exchange for my water? This isn't an exchange. It sounded like one. Come to the hearing then. Bring whatever Walt left you. I will." Friday morning, the county building smelled of floor wax and damp coats. The hearing room held 4 board members at a raised table, rows of wooden chairs, and a side table for documents. Sydney arrived with Martinez and Brian. Monica was already there. She wore the same green cardigan beneath a wool coat and carried a large handbag on her lap. "You came alone?" Sydney asked. "I came with a taxi driver who has strong opinions about road drainage. You didn't have to be here this early. Walter made me wait 8 years. I can manage 20 minutes. Pham entered next. He sat near the aisle with a Crown Peak folder, acknowledged Sydney with a small nod, and spoke to no one. Chelsea arrived between Ethan and Devon. Peter Lang followed with 2 document boxes and an assistant. Ethan wore a dark jacket over a white shirt. Devon had dressed as if for church. Chelsea's expression was calm, almost sympathetic. She stopped near Sydney's row. "You could still end this privately," Chelsea said. "You filed a public complaint against my home. I filed a safety complaint. You listed foundation damage without entering the cabin. The porch is visible from the road. The porch isn't the foundation." Ethan touched Chelsea's elbow. "Leave it." They moved to the front row. Devon remained behind. "Did you tell Ethan about the trailer?" Sydney asked. His face answered. "Not yet," he said. "Then today may be busy for you." He went after them. The board chair called the hearing to order. She explained that the matter concerned authority over the Hansen Springs diversion, the historic water certificate, and a proposed commercial lease affecting Willow Creek. Peter stood first. He described Hansen Cattle Company as a continuous family operation. He said Gerald, and now Ethan, had maintained the creek channels, grazed the surrounding land, and used the water openly for decades. He called the trust filing a surprise claim based on documents recently found in questionable storage. Sydney watched Chelsea's face. Questionable storage meant Walt's strongbox. Surprise claim meant they hadn't known. Continuous use meant they wanted the benefit of his work without the boundary he left behind. Peter called Ethan. Ethan swore to tell the truth and sat at the witness table. "Who has managed Willow Creek water since Gerald Hansen's death?" Peter asked. "I have." "Who managed it before?" "My father." "Did Sydney Hansen participate in management decisions?" "No." Sydney's hands tightened around each other. Martinez wrote something on a legal pad, but did not object. Peter continued. "When did you first hear of the Hansen Springs Trust?" "After Sydney moved into the line camp and began digging." "Before that, did anyone in your immediate family treat the spring parcel as separate?" "No." Monica shifted in her chair. Ethan saw her but kept going. He testified that Crown Peak had negotiated with him because he controlled the operating ranch. He said the lease income was needed to service company debt and preserve local jobs. There were no employees in the hearing room to support that statement, but it sounded responsible. Did you sign a proposed agreement? Peter asked. Yes. On whose authority? As owner of Hanson Cattle Company and the recorded ranch acreage. Did you believe that authority included Willow Creek irrigation? Yes. Peter placed the proposed lease on the evidence table. Ethan had signed it 3 days earlier, after visiting Sidney's cabin, after seeing the hidden map, and after receiving the deed description with its uncertain boundary. He had not waited for verification. He had committed the ranch to deliver water he did not hold. Peter called Chelsea next. She testified that Gerald intended all ranch operations to pass to Ethan. She said Walter's effects had remained untouched in storage and that no one knew whether the papers inside the buried box were complete, altered, or legally current. Did Gerald ever tell you Sidney owned Hanson Springs? Peter asked. No. Did Walter? No. Would Gerald have allowed a separate water claim to threaten the ranch? Never. Chelsea said the word with confidence. She did not mention calling Monica. She did not mention Devin's debt. She did not mention pushing Gerald until he stopped arguing. Peter called Devin only to confirm that the family had always used the cabin as a ranch outbuilding. Devin agreed. He also said Sidney had never paid rent, taxes, or maintenance on it before Gerald's death. Then Peter returned to his table. The family's position is simple, he said. Whatever these newly discovered documents may suggest, practical ownership and continuous beneficial use have remained with Hanson Cattle Company. We ask the board to reject the trustee filing and recognize Ethan Hanson's authority to complete the Crown Peak lease. He sat down. The chair looked toward Martinez. Mr. Martinez, you may present Ms. Hanson's evidence. Martinez stood and carried one folder to the evidence table. This is the certified state engineer's record, he said. It matches the original certificate found inside Walter Hanson's strongbox. He placed both copies side by side. The chair compared the certificate numbers, dates, seals, and surveyed location. Martinez handed her the recorded parcel deed next. This deed separated 40 acres from the main Hanson ranch. Gerald Hanson never owned that parcel. His will could not transfer it to Ethan Hanson. Peter rose. Continuous use may still establish control, not against an active senior right held by the recorded land trust, Martinez said. He produced Walt's maintenance filings. Each year was accounted for. Monica's signatures appeared after Walt's death. Then he called Monica. She took the oath and sat with both hands around the microphone. Did Walter Hanson ask you to serve as trustee? Martinez asked. Yes. Did he tell you who the trust was for? Sidney. When? The year before he died. Why did you not give Sidney the papers then? I didn't have them. I had half a map. A board member looked up. Half a map? Monica nodded toward the cracked barometer resting on Sidney's table. Walter hid the other half inside that. He told me Sidney had to bring me his written words before I gave her mine. Martinez lifted the joined map. What did the completed map identify? The original spring house. That's where Sidney and Brian found the strongbox. Did anyone pressure you about Walter's property? Chelsea called, after Sidney took the barometer. Chelsea's face went still. What did she ask? Whether Walter had promised Sidney anything. Peter objected. The chair allowed the answer because it concerned knowledge of the trust. Martinez asked Monica why she transferred trusteeship to Sidney. Because Walter named her, she found what he left, and she came asking what the land required before asking what it was worth. Monica stepped down. Pham took her place. Peter looked less certain now. Did Ethan Hanson submit a proposed lease to Crown Peak? Martinez asked. Yes. Would Crown Peak complete that lease based on the evidence presented today? No. Why not? Ethan Hanson cannot convey water rights held by the Hanson Springs Trust. Ethan stared ahead. Pham continued. Crown Peak will negotiate only with the recorded trustee and rightful holder. So, the proposed lease is over? It is. The words were quiet. Their effect wasn't. Ethan had committed to a payment schedule based on water he could not deliver. Crown Peak would not proceed, and Hanson Cattle Company would receive none of the expected lease money. Martinez called Sidney last. She carried Walt's letter to the witness table. Did you know about the trust before opening the barometer? He asked. No. Did you know the brass tube was hollow? No. Something moved when I took it down. What was inside? Half a map, a brass token, and a note. What did the note say? Sydney looked at the barometer. Home is where the water starts. And where did the map take you? To the first spring house. The strongbox was under its foundation. Now that you control the senior right, do you intend to deny all water to Hanson Cattle Company? Ethan finally looked at her. No, Sydney said. Chelsea closed her eyes briefly. Sydney took a document from Martinez. This is a water-sharing covenant. It protects the ranch's existing irrigation, as long as the spring parcel remains under my stewardship, and the company follows measured use during shortages. The chair read the first page. You are offering this voluntarily? Yes. Why? Walt kept the spring separate. He didn't cut it away from everyone downstream. Martinez entered the covenant into the record. The board recessed for 20 minutes. Nobody in the Hanson family spoke to Sydney. When the members returned, the chair read their findings. The 40-acre Hanson Springs parcel was separate from Gerald's estate. The trust was active. Sydney's appointment as trustee was valid. The water certificate remained in good standing and held its 1971 priority. Ethan had no authority to lease it. The board recognized Sydney as the person authorized to manage the diversion and forwarded its decision to the state engineer. It also accepted her covenant. The consequence was exact. Ethan kept the ranch, but not unchecked control of the water. Chelsea kept the main house, but her complaint could no longer describe Sydney as a trespasser. Devin kept what remained of his inheritance, along with every debt he had hoped someone else's property would erase. Outside the hearing room, Ethan stopped Sydney beside the stairs. You let Peter put all of that on record. You chose what he said. You could have warned me about the certificate. I asked for the deed. You signed the lease anyway. He looked down at the covenant. You're really guaranteeing the irrigation? If you follow the limits, and if I don't? Then Martinez sends notice, and we return to the board. Ethan nodded. He wasn't grateful yet. He was too embarrassed and too worried about the company debt. I shouldn't have said you owned nothing, he said. No? I thought keeping the ranch meant keeping control. That's what Walt was afraid of. Ethan folded the covenant carefully. I need time. So do I. That was all they settled that day. Chelsea's complaint brought the inspector back the next week. This time, Sydney met him with recorded proof of authority, a roof plan, a sanitation permit application, and 2 working detectors. Brian stood on the porch holding a level. The inspector checked the stove, reviewed the plans, and gave Sydney a repair schedule instead of an order to leave. After his vehicle disappeared, Brian handed her the level. You're 6 inches low on the west side, the house or me. House is easier to fix. They removed the damaged roof one section at a time. Brian brought rafters from his barn. Sydney paid for metal panels with a short-term loan secured by the trust, not by selling the land. Monica came on the day they raised the new porch beam. She sat beneath a cottonwood with a thermos and corrected Brian's memories of Walt. He didn't reset that foundation alone, she said. I didn't say alone. You left out the 3 men who helped. They left before lunch. They left after supper. Sydney worked above them, driving screws into the roof while their argument moved from the flood to an old tractor. Pham returned once the state engineer recorded the board's findings. He brought a purchase proposal, valuing the parcel in senior right near $4 million. Sydney read it at the new kitchen table. Crown Peak wanted control of the spring, the access corridor, and the right to seek expanded use. No, she said. Pham closed the folder. You read quickly. The answer was no before you arrived. Then why meet? Because I'll discuss a limited seasonal agreement after the ranch covenant, Brian's right, and the creek's minimum flow are protected. That is worth considerably less. I know. Pham studied the repaired cabin, the stacked stone around the spring path, and the monitoring gauge Sydney had installed beside the diversion. You'd keep ownership. Yes. And Crown Peak receives only measured surplus. Yes. Subject to state approval. Yes. Pham opened a fresh page in his notebook. Then let's discuss measured surplus. The agreement took months, but it paid enough to finish the cabin without putting the spring at risk. Devin did not return the $15,000 check because Sydney had never taken it. He sold another truck, told Ethan about the trailer, and faced the anger he had postponed. Brian offered him work replacing the north fence. On the first morning, Devin arrived late. Brian pointed toward a stack of posts. You get paid for hours you're here. Devin looked at Sydney, who was tightening wire farther down the line. You keeping score? He asked. No. He waited for something harsher. It didn't come. Sydney said, "The corner brace is loose." Devin picked up a wrench. By autumn, he had paid down part of the debt. He and Sydney weren't close. Trust returned in smaller pieces than money did. He stopped asking what the spring was worth, which was a beginning. Chelsea came to the cabin only once during the rebuilding. She brought Gerald's canvas jacket, washed and folded. "I kept thinking it belonged with the house," she said. Sydney took it from her. It belonged to him. Chelsea looked through the open doorway. "And now? Now I use it." Chelsea nodded. "I was afraid there wouldn't be enough for Devin and me. So, you decided there shouldn't be enough for me." "Yes." The honesty came late, but it came without decoration. Sydney didn't forgive her. She did offer coffee. Chelsea sat on the finished porch and drank half a cup before leaving. If stories about young people rebuilding a life after family betrayal matter to you, subscribe and return for the next inheritance story. Winter arrived after the last porch rail went in. One evening, Brian closed the new shutters while Sydney added wood to the stove. Monica's blue enamel mug dried beside the sink. Gerald's jacket hung near the door. The strongbox rested on a shelf with copies inside, while the originals remained secured in town. Above the new stone mantel, the barometer had clear glass, polished brass, and a repaired mechanism. Its needle moved as the pressure fell. Sydney heard the creak beneath the wind and looked up at Walt's instrument. Then she turned the latch on her own door, crossed her warm floor, and came home.